Hi guys and welcome to Studio Wildlife. In today's video I'm going to show you how to paint a dog really easily in acrylics. The colours I use are white, Naples yellow, bit of sap green, some yellow ochre, some raw sienna, some burnt umber, raw umber and some black. So to start with, I'm just doing a blocking base coat, just using some sap green. And all I'm really doing here is just trying to get rid of some of that harsh white. And I'm just doing a couple of layers over the top of this prepared wooden MDF board that I made and cut myself. And yeah, this layer is just about prepping and making sure to always paint those sides at this stage so you're not left with pure white sides at the very end of your painting. This next layer is about building up and establishing that background a little bit more, and for this stage I'm just using some raw sienna green, a little bit of black and some white, and I'm just using a flat brush just to try and build up some abstract shapes and marks. I'm trying to go for that blurry out of focus background effect, that bokeh effect. And to get those tiny little circles that you sometimes see in that bokeh effect, I'm just using a filbert brush. And I'm not being super specific with it because it's such a tiny 6" by 4" painting. I'm not worried about it being perfect, and I'm just using that filbert brush to block in some of those circles and just give it that sort of out of focus faded background look. If I was doing this on a bigger picture, I would probably use an airbrush to do this rather than just using a brush like this, but I just thought I'd show you my process for the background. Next, for this one, I'm actually going to trace my picture onto the canvas just because it's quicker and easier for me. I know I can draw this if I wanted to, but for you guys practicing and just getting into drawing, it's always better to actually draw them yourself than trace it. So you can see here how I've got that traced out dog. So all I'm going to do next is just start to block in my picture. And I'm just treating this as an underpainting, so I'm actually going quite thin with the acrylics, and I'm just using some black, a small angle brush and a small detail brush just for the start, and then I'm going to start to add in some greys by mixing a little bit of white and some creamy colours. For this blocking stage I'm just working quite thin. I'm just trying to establish the basic shapes and structures of the dog, and I am just working a lot darker than I want the final layers to be because I like working from dark to light and having that dark substantial underpainting there for me to work over the top of. So you can see here I'm just starting to put in the white fur, and for the white fur I'm actually just using some raw sienna mixed with a little bit of burnt umber, mixed with a little bit of black and some white to create this dark creamy colour. And I'm just building up this wash, sometimes letting it dry and going over the top of it just to make it a little bit more substantial if I thought it was a little bit too watery. And yeah, I'm just working and looking at my reference photo closely, trying to follow those lines, trying to follow those shapes, and just blocking in this basic structure. This bit is really easy. It's almost like paint by numbers. I didn't want this little guy sat on nothing, so I thought I'd paint in this nice soft green blanket for him to sit on, which matches the colours and the tones and the vibe of the rest of the painting. I'm trying to keep the painting quite soft at this stage as I work on the body. The back of the body wants to almost fade into the background, so I'm keeping it quite loose, quite soft, just using that small angled brush. Then once I start to bring in the details of the fur, I'm just using the tip of the angled brush for slightly more detailed layers, and I'm just trying to add in those tufts of body fur. Once that's done, sometimes you can rub it away to soften it. I then start to glaze over the darker colours over the top, just with thin washes. Again, I've got a video about glazing if you want to go and check that out. But most of this layer is just about adding in those colours, blocking in that detailed fur, and just starting to glaze over the top of things to get colours and shadows correct. Next, I'm working on the paws, and for the paws I want these to be really sharp and really in focus. So I'm going to start in exactly the same way, using that angled brush just to block them in, but then I'm working over the top of that with a finer detailed brush. And that detailed brush allows me to get those sharp strands of fur, again working in the same way as I do with all my fur and all my paintings. I am building up the colours, my darkest first, and then working over the top of them with my lighter layers. And I'm just trying to establish that light and sharp, fine, in focus detail of those paws, because they are right at the front of the picture and they are one of the things that I want you to focus on. The face will be the other thing obviously, but we haven't got around to painting that properly yet. I can then use that detail brush as well, just to add in some dark patterns and dark shapes of the speckles of the fur, and then just refine it even more using that detail brush and soften it if I need to with the angle brush. Next, I'm working on the face. Once the paws and the body are done, this is going to be the most detailed section. And I started with the eyes because I really want to make them pop and be like big, bright puppy dog eyes. And then just using that detailed brush, I start to refine those eyes a little bit more and then start to build the colour. And all I'm doing here is just laying in those strands of fur with that detailed brush, just like a paint by numbers. We don't have to go into super detail because it's such a small painting, but I can then work over the top of that with some lighter coloured grey paint. And then finally I can do an even lighter grey colour, mixing it with even more white, just to add in some final details on the right hand side of that dog. We can then repeat the process on the left hand side and then glaze in some more blacks once that's done, again using that small detailed brush. I can then move on to the ears, which again I want these to be a little bit softer, so I'm just using that angle brush to make them a little bit more out of focus, and then in some places for the extreme highlights just building up even more lighter colours using that detailed brush. I then move on to the nose. I just keep the nose quite grey, starting with my darkest colours and then bringing out the lighter colours on top. For the wet look, I want that almost pure white, and I'm just sort of dotting it onto the tips of the nose to keep those sort of wet speckled look that I like. Then once that's done, I can start to work on the rest of the fur around the mouth. Again, I start from dark to light and then build my lighter colours over the top. I'm trying to incorporate some of the background green into this just to show it reflecting in the fur strands of that muzzle. So I'm just using that detail brush again, working from dark to light, putting in my dark shapes first, which I will then refine later by adding in the white strands of fur, which is what I'm doing now. And I'm not using pure white here, I'm using quite a grey colour, and I'm just adding in those strands of fur where I think they should be going, and then working over the top of it once again with a lighter colour. So I'm working from grey to a lighter grey to an even lighter grey that is almost pure white but not quite pure white. I then wanted this to have almost a backlit appearance, which is where the light is coming from behind the dog, so I just added a faint outline of this light blue to give it the impression of that light glowing behind it. Then just neaten up the picture just using the detail brush, and then it's time for the whiskers. For the whiskers, you need to pay attention to the light and the shadow. So the left hand side is going to be a lot darker than the right hand side, which is in the light. So you can see that on my image. I'm using a sword liner brush here for this step, and it is my favourite brush to do whiskers. You can see that sometimes it's a little bit bright, so I just glaze some black over the top of those whiskers, and any areas that I don't like, just to remove them or just to knock them back a little bit and add some shadow to those whiskers. That's pretty much it for this painting. I hope you like the process, and I hope watching this video helps you learn how to paint your own dogs. This was only a very small painting, so I couldn't really go into much detail with it, and I couldn't really go into the ins and outs of painting a dog properly. I have actually got a full video on Patreon, which I think is about 2.5 hours long, where you can paint along with me in real time, which goes through my process and goes through those steps just a little bit more. Once again, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, head on over to studiowildlife.com for more wildlife art tips. I'll see you next time.